Is the divine sovereign evil? Is Theodora based on a real-life saint or a Byzantine empress? Can history point us to the answers? Hello everyone, I'm Megan Sullivan and welcome to the first episode in my new series, The Secret History Behind Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave. In this series, I use real-world history to explain the fascinating story and themes behind Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, and whether you're a Fire Emblem fan, a history fan, or both, I hope you find this series educational and entertaining. By the way, I did something similar with Fire Emblem Three Houses a few years ago, and you can find all of those episodes on my website, historyandgames.com. All right, let's get started. So according to the Japanese and English trailers for the new Fire Emblem, the game takes place in a city called Dagza or Daxian. There, a ruler called the Divine Sovereign is overseeing a gladiatorial event known as the Heroic Games, called the Great Gladiatorial Festival of Daxian in the Japanese version of the trailer. The Divine Sovereign promises to grant one wish to the winner of the Heroic Games, and during the trailer, we see some of the game's participants, including a boy named Kai, a warrior named Theodora, a swordsman named Dietrich, and a dancer named Lita. It's not clear if these are the leaders of different countries, different factions, or they're just random individuals wielding the same creststones and divine weapons we see in Fire Emblem Three Houses. But it's clear these are the main protagonists of Fortune's Weave. And just like in Three Houses, it's likely that their world and backstories are inspired by real-world history. In this case, the Roman Empire, which lasted from the mid-1st century BCE until the mid-16th century CE and stretched from the British Isles all the way to the Middle East and incorporated parts of Western Europe and North Africa. Now, when people think of the Roman Empire, they usually think of Roman amphitheaters, Roman temples, Roman triumphs and triumphal arches, Roman aqueducts, Roman chariot races, and Roman emperors who thought they were gods. And if you watch the trailer for Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, you can see all of those things. For example, right in the opening shot, you can see a city that prominently features an amphitheater, a Greek and Roman temple complete with a processional ramp, and a Roman-style aqueduct. Then later in the trailer, we not only see a Roman triumph, we see a triumphal arch with what looks like an imperial statue behind it. What's even more interesting than the Roman architecture, though, are the Roman-esque characters we see in the trailer. There's a man dressed in Roman military mail sitting next to a lady with what looks like a Roman hairstyle and Roman dress. There are a number of charioteers doing battle with multiple people, and most importantly of all, we're introduced to the Divine Sovereign, who is robed and crowned in a solar motif, as if he's embodying the Roman concept of Sol Invictus, the unconquered and unconquerable sun. There's no doubt that Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave is influenced by ancient Rome, and by studying the Roman Empire, we might be able to better understand things like the game's overall theme, individual character motivation, and even the laws and customs of Daxian. But when and where in the Roman Empire does Daxian, or Dagza, take its cues from? Well, if we study the trailer, we might be able to find the answer to both these questions. And we'll start with the where. Many history buffs noticed that in the opening shot of the trailer, the imperial city of Daxian not only includes Roman features like an amphitheater, a temple, and an aqueduct, but also features a double harbor. The most famous city in the Roman Empire to feature a double harbor was Carthage, located in modern Tunisia in North Africa. Carthage, which had been a major maritime power since the 9th century BCE, was famously destroyed by its arch-nemesis Rome during the Third Punic War in the 2nd century BCE. It was then rebuilt under the auspices of Julius Caesar a century later, and became hugely important to the Roman Empire for military, commercial, and later with the rise of Christianity, spiritual purposes. It was such an important city that when it was lost to the Vandals in the 5th century, it was considered to be a huge blow, and was a testament to the spiraling decline of the western half of the Roman Empire. But the eastern half of the empire, founded in the early 4th century by Emperor Constantine, was on the rise. And in the mid-6th century, Justinian I ordered his general, Belisarius, to win Carthage back for Rome, which he did. And it would remain in Roman hands until the Arab conquest of the mid-late 7th century. In short, the importance of Carthage as a religious, military, and commercial center would make a great template for a fictional city. But are we sure Daxian is inspired by Carthage? Are there any other clues that could point us in the direction of North Africa? Actually, there are. For example, in the trailer for Fortune's Weave, we see a battle taking place among the ruins of an ancient city. The battle involves a chariot rider taking on a dark-skinned boy named Kai, which could be short for Kaiser or Caesar, another nod to Rome. Kai is riding a new type of mount for the series called an ornius, which sounds a lot like the ancient Greek word ornis, which means chicken or bird. But the ornius doesn't look like an ordinary bird. It looks like both a rooster and an ostrich, and this might be a deliberate choice on the part of the developer. You see, the ancient Romans were fascinated by ostriches and imported them from North Africa to be used in their gladiatorial games. So a charioteer riding through ruins, which could point to the destruction of a once proud city, and fighting a tan-skinned character riding an ostrich feels like a nod to Carthage, its culture, and its history. As does another scene where a dark-skinned woman named Theodora manages to slice and dice a charioteer while fighting enemies in an arid landscape very reminiscent of North Africa. So it feels safe to say that Roman Carthage could absolutely be the inspiration for the city of Daxian. But what era of Roman Carthage inspired Fortune's Weave? Well, thanks to our near certainty that Daxian is based on Roman Carthage, we can set the terminus dates to somewhere between 49 BCE and 698 CE. And if we look closely at the main characters in the game, we can narrow the dates down further still. Over the course of this series, we'll take a closer look at Kai, Theodora, Leda, and Diedrich, as well as any other characters who are revealed in future trailers for the game. But today, I want to focus on the Divine Sovereign, whose very name invokes the imperial cult of Rome, which worshipped the Roman emperors as gods from the time of Caesar Augustus until the time of Emperor Constantine. So as the trailer makes clear, the Divine Sovereign is the ruler of Daxian, and is the one overseeing the heroic, or Daxian, games. His pointed ears and slightly greenish-yellow chartreuse hair suggest that he's a Nabatean, an ancient dragon race in 3 houses that once ruled the continent of Folan, or at least was sort of in charge of it, and is responsible for starting the Church of Saros, whose founder venerated the blue star goddess Sothis, the progenitor goddess of all life in Fire Emblem 3 houses. The Divine Sovereign doesn't seem to be a part of the Church of Saros, however. He's not wearing the ecclesiastical robes that Rhea and other church members wore in 3 houses. Instead, the Divine Sovereign is wearing a solar crown and has a repeating pattern of sun rays decorating his clothing. This solar motif may indicate that the Divine Sovereign is head of a completely different religion, one that may revolve around the progenitor goddess — the sun is a star after all — or may simply revolve around the sovereign specifically. By the way, that solar motif is a huge clue as to which era of the Roman Empire we should look at when trying to figure out the historical model for Fortune's Weave and the Divine Sovereign. So let's talk about the solar cult of Rome. We know that Rome featured a sun cult from its very inception, and that one of the earliest forms of the sun to be worshipped was Sol Indiges. But it wasn't until the 3rd century that the sun cult was brought front and center. This was thanks to Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, better known to history as Elagabalus, whose great-uncle was none other than the astrologically inclined Septimius Servius, Rome's first North African emperor, who grew up not too far from Carthage and portrayed the sun on some of his coinage. But Elagabalus wanted to do more than just stamp images of the sun on coins. This emperor is actually famous for synergizing the Syrian sun god Elagabal with the Roman sun god Sol, and then declaring this new god to be the supreme deity of the empire. Unfortunately, Elagabalus proved to be highly unpopular and was assassinated at just 18 years old, and his specific sun cult in Rome more or less died when he did. But the sun rose again under Emperor Aurelian a century later, who promoted the new and what would end up being the very popular cult of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, whose festivals, including his birthday festival on December 25th, included dozens of chariot races, a nod to the very ancient belief that the sun rode across the sky in a chariot pulled by horses. This cult would prove to be so popular and so long-lasting that even after Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity in the early 4th century, he continued to issue coins with the image of Sol Invictus on them for another 10 years, and even made Sol's sacred day, Sunday, the official day of prayer and rest for Christians. And what's really interesting about the Roman sun cult is how the emperors who heavily promoted it all had something in common. They helped to reunify the empire. For instance, Septimius Severus, the great uncle of Elagabalus, won the War of the Five Emperors, a civil dispute that broke out after the assassination of Emperor Commodus in the late 2nd century. Meanwhile, Aurelian managed to unify the empire after it split into 3 sub-kingdoms in the late 3rd century, and Constantine won the War of the Tetrarchy after the 4 rulers of Rome had a falling out in the early 4th century. These sun-worshipping emperors were praised for bringing stability to a fractured empire and managed to reunite everyone under the same sun. Which begs the question, could the divine sovereign of Fortune's Weave also be a great unifier? It makes sense. After all, Fire Emblem Three Houses was about the fracturing of an empire into 3 kingdoms that eventually became embroiled in a religious war. Perhaps Fortune's Weave is about the unification of a fractured empire and uniting the people under a solar religion. And if that's the case, it's easy to see how the divine sovereign could be directly inspired by emperors like Septimius Severus, Aurelian, and even Constantine. But uniting an empire isn't easy, especially when you have outsiders invading your territory on the one hand, and internal revolts fueled by religious conviction on the other. In the next few episodes, we're going to address those themes by taking a closer look at new Fire Emblem characters like Theodora, Kai, Diedrich, and Lita, and explore how events in both Fire Emblem Three Houses and Roman Carthage may have shaped their backstories, their unique personalities, and their personal motivations for participating in the heroic games. So join me next time as I talk about Theodora, Queen of Salamis, to learn how her religious convictions could have a huge impact on Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave. And remember, if you have some cool history-related theories about Fire Emblem, any Fire Emblem, let me know in the comment section. Thanks so much for supporting History and Games, everyone. Until next time!